My mother raised her glass before I had finished my lemon tart. To Chloe, she said, smiling at my younger sister. And to finally getting Willow and Finch. Chloe laughed and covered her face while my dad, Mark, gave her a careful smile. I looked between them, waiting for someone to explain. Willow and Finch was the event, design studio, where Chloe had worked for almost 6 years. The owner was thinking about selling, and Chloe dreamed of buying it. What I didn't know was how my parents planned to help. Then Mom said, "Grandma's money means you won't have to borrow nearly as much." My fork stopped halfway to my plate. 3 weeks earlier, I had received the final transfer from my grandmother's estate. $3.8 million. Every dollar had been left to me. My parents didn't know. Chloe didn't know. No one in my family knew because I hadn't told them. And now my mother was calmly promising Grandma's money to my sister. I set down my fork. "How much are you talking about?" "Around 900,000 should give Chloe enough room to do this properly." Chloe nodded. "The purchase, renovations, some operating cash. We've gone over the numbers." "We?" That word bothered me almost as much as the amount. Dad reached for his coffee but didn't drink it. "Nothing's final yet," he said. Mom glanced at him. "It practically is." I looked at Chloe. "Have you signed anything?" "Not yet." "Put down a deposit?" "No, but Diane needs my answer tomorrow afternoon." Diane was the studio owner. Suddenly, this wasn't one of Mom's hopeful plans that might disappear by next month. Chloe was preparing to make a business decision on Monday based on money my parents did not have. "What exactly did Grandma tell you?" I asked. Mom's expression tightened. "Natalie, your grandmother always worried about Chloe getting settled. You know that." "That wasn't my question." Dad shifted in his chair. Chloe looked from Mom to me. I was trying to understand how 4 people could discuss $900,000 while I was the only one who knew the money wasn't theirs to discuss. Mom folded her napkin. She wanted Chloe to have a real start. She said that more than once. Grandma had worried about Chloe. Everyone had. Chloe changed college programs twice, bounced between freelance jobs, then found something she loved at Willow and Finch. I was 30, managed regional operations for a specialty grocery company, paid my own bills, and rarely needed rescuing. In our family, that had slowly become less of a compliment and more of an assignment. Still, none of that explained $900,000. So Grandma specifically said she wanted Chloe to get that amount. Mom sighed. "Why are you turning this into an interrogation?" "I'm asking one question, because this is good news." Chloe's smile faded. "Nat? What's going on?" "I want to make sure you're not committing to something before the money is actually available." Mom gave a short laugh. "The money will be available." Dad looked down at the table. I noticed. He looked uncomfortable, like someone listening to a conversation he had already tried and failed to change. "Dad," I said. He cleared his throat. "Your mother has looked at what Chloe would need." That was not an answer either. Chloe pushed her chair back. "I told Diane financing was secure." "Secure how?" Mom said it was handled. Mom jumped in. "And it is." I stared at her. She had no idea Grandma's estate had already been settled, yet she sounded completely certain. That certainty frightened me more than a demand would have. A demand would at least admit I had a choice. This sounded like my choice had already been made. Brunch ended awkwardly. Mom started clearing plates. Dad disappeared into the kitchen. I picked up my bag and told Chloe, "Please don't sign anything non-refundable tomorrow until we talk." She frowned. "Why?" "Because I think there's something about the money you don't know." Her face changed. "What do you know?" Before I answered, Mom called from the kitchen. I told Chloe I would call later and headed outside. At my car, the front door opened. Chloe hurried down the steps without her coat. "Natalie, wait." I turned. She folded her arms against the cold. "Are you upset because of the amount?" "No." "Then why are you acting like this?" "Because Mom can't promise money she doesn't control." Chloe blinked. "What are you talking about?" What did she tell you? She said Grandma left money for the family. For us. Hand. Chloe hesitated. That you wanted me to use most of it for the studio because you're already doing fine. I stared at her. She said I told her that. She said you agreed it was fair. I had never discussed Grandma's estate with Mom. I had never told her how much I inherited. I had never offered Chloe a share. Not once. When did she say I agreed? Chloe looked uneasy. Months ago. Grandma died 5 months ago. I know. Did Mom tell you this before Grandma died? She nodded. I drove home with that answer sitting beside me like another passenger. I could have called Mom immediately. I could have told everyone the truth and ended the argument in one sentence: Grandma left the money to me. Instead, I unlocked the wooden box Grandma had mailed me the previous winter. Inside were photographs, recipes, birthday cards, and little things I had not been ready to sort through. Near the bottom was a card from my 32nd birthday. I remembered the front, a ridiculous watercolor of a dog wearing reading glasses. I didn't remember the line Grandma had written beneath her signature. You don't always have to be the one who says yes. I read it twice. Until that afternoon, I had thought it was ordinary advice. Now I wasn't sure. My parents were promising my sister money they didn't control. Chloe believed I had already agreed, and apparently that story had started while Grandma was still alive. For the first time, the question wasn't what my family would do when they learned about the $3.8 million. It was why Grandma might have known I would need permission to say no. I called Chloe at 8 the next morning, before either of us had enough time to decide what the other person had done wrong. She answered on the third ring. Please tell me what yesterday was about. I asked her to tell me exactly what Mom had said about Grandma's money. There was a pause. You were there for some of those conversations. No, Chloe, I wasn't. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she started from the beginning. According to Mom, Grandma had always intended her estate to help both of us, but because I had a steady career, savings, and no major debt, I had agreed Chloe should use most of what was available. Mom had apparently described it as something the three of us understood without needing to make complicated. She said you didn't care about getting a big inheritance, Chloe said. She said you wanted me to have a chance to build something. I leaned against my kitchen counter. Did Mom ever tell you she actually asked me? She said you agreed. That's not what I asked. Chloe went quiet. I assume she asked. That distinction mattered. Did she ever tell you what Grandma's will said? No. Did you see anything from the estate? No. Did Grandma ever tell you directly that she was leaving you money for the studio? Chloe's voice sharpened. Why are you asking me like I did something wrong? Because I'm trying to figure out what you were told. And I'm trying to figure out why you suddenly sound like there's no money. I almost told her then. $3.8 million. Solely to me. It would have ended one question and created 10 more. Instead, I asked, when did Mom first say I'd agreed? Chloe thought about it. Last fall, maybe. Before Thanksgiving. Grandma had died in March, so Grandma was alive. Yes. I sat down. That changed the timeline completely. Mom hadn't misunderstood an estate distribution after Grandma died. She had been telling Chloe what would happen to Grandma's money while Grandma was still alive. Chloe continued, less defensively now. Mom said Grandma knew you'd be fine. She said you already had your life together and Grandma was worried I'd never get a real start. That phrase, Natalie will be fine, was so familiar I almost missed what it meant. It had explained why I could change holiday plans, cover an unexpected bill, take the smaller bedroom on family trips, or wait until later because Chloe needed something now. Usually those things were small enough that arguing felt petty. $900,000 was harder to dismiss. Whatever Diane gives you today, I said, don't sign anything non-refundable, Natalie. I mean it. Are you changing your mind? The question landed harder than an accusation. Chloe wasn't asking whether I would help her. She believed I already had. I'm asking you to wait until we know what's real. You know something. I do. Then tell me. I looked at the wooden box still sitting on my table. But first I need to understand what Mom has been telling everyone. Chloe exhaled. Diane isn't going to wait forever. I know. And if I lose this because you suddenly decided. I never decided anything, Chloe. Silence. What does that mean? It means I never told Mom you could use Grandma's money. I heard her breathing change. Not 900,000. Nothing. But she said. I know what she said. Chloe ended the call a minute later, not angry exactly, but unsettled. I typed her a message. Please don't sign anything non-refundable until we talk again. My thumb hovered over the screen. Normally I would have added sorry. Sorry for making this complicated. Sorry for upsetting her. Sorry for not solving it immediately. I deleted the apology and sent the message as written. Less than 5 minutes later, Mom called. What did you say to your sister? No hello. I told her not to sign anything until she knows where the financing is coming from. Why are you frightening her right before the biggest opportunity of her life? Because you promised her $900,000. Discussed what she would need. Whose money did you discuss? Mom gave an irritated sigh. Natalie, I am not doing this word game with you. It's not a word game. Did Grandma ever tell you, specifically? That Chloe was getting $900,000. Your grandmother wanted Chloe secure. Did she say 900,000? She didn't need to put every thought into a contract. That was the first real answer Mom had given me. She didn't have a specific instruction. She had an interpretation. So no, I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Her voice softened, which somehow made me more cautious. Honey, your sister finally found something she's good at. You know how hard that's been for her. Grandma knew too. Nobody is taking anything away from you. The strange part was that Mom still didn't ask whether I knew what Grandma's estate contained. She didn't ask whether I had spoken to an executor or received anything. She talked as if the details would eventually arrange themselves around what she had already decided was fair. What do you think happens when the estate is settled? I asked. It gets divided appropriately. By who? By the people involved. Which people? She hesitated. Why are you doing this? Because Chloe is about to make a business decision based on your promise. And the money will work itself out. There it was again, certainty without authority. I ended the call before frustration made me reveal more than I wanted to. I wasn't trying to trap Mom. I needed to understand whether she had misunderstood something Grandma said, whether Dad knew more than he was admitting, or whether my family had simply decided my consent was a detail they could fill in later. I went back to Grandma's box. There were dozens of cards inside, most ordinary birthdays, Christmas, congratulations when I got promoted. Grandma had always liked handwritten notes. I spread several across the table, looking for something I might have overlooked. Most of them sounded exactly as I remembered. She was proud of me. She thought I worked too much. She wanted me to take vacations before I was 60. Only that birthday card felt different now. You don't always have to be the one who says yes. I turned it over, half expecting another message. Nothing. Then I remembered the year she sent it. Chloe had been between jobs, and Mom had asked me to cancel a trip because she wanted everyone home to keep Chloe company. I had done it. Grandma knew. At the time, her note had seemed like gentle grandmotherly advice. Now I wondered whether she had been watching something I had spent years calling normal. I picked up my phone and called Mom again. This time I wasn't interested in what she thought Grandma meant. Tell me the exact words Grandma used when she talked about Chloe, I said. Mom was quiet for several seconds. When she answered, her voice had lost some of its certainty. She told me she needed to know Chloe would land on her feet. That sounded like Grandma, which meant Mom hadn't invented everything. She had started with something true. And somehow, from that one sentence, my family had arrived at a $900,000 promise made in my name. The question now wasn't whether Grandma had worried about Chloe. She clearly had. The question was what Grandma actually meant, and how far Mom had gone after hearing it. Mom's sentence stayed with me because it sounded exactly like something Grandma would have said. She had worried about Chloe. That part wasn't suspicious. Years earlier, when Chloe dropped out of her second college program and spent months drifting between jobs, Grandma had been one of the few people who could encourage her without making her feel like a failure. So when Mom said Grandma had told her she needed to know Chloe would land on her feet, I believed her. What I didn't believe was the leap from that sentence to $900,000. When did she say it? I asked. A few years ago. Chloe was having a hard time. And did Grandma ever say that meant leaving Chloe her estate? Mom went quiet. Not everything has to be spelled out. Natalie. That's not what I asked. You know how your grandmother felt about family. Did she ever say Chloe was inheriting money? Another pause. She wanted your sister secure. We were back where we started. Mom had one true sentence and an entire financial plan built around it. I thanked her and ended the call before we could circle again. By lunchtime I was driving to my parents' house, but I wasn't going to see Mom. Dad spent most Monday afternoons in the detached garage behind the house, restoring an old motorcycle he had owned since his 20s. I found him at his workbench with a carburetor spread across a towel. Got a minute? He glanced toward the house before nodding. That small movement told me more than I wanted it to. I need you to answer something without telling me what Mom thinks Grandma meant. He wiped his hands. All right. Did Grandma ever tell you Chloe was inheriting money? Dad stared at the rag in his hands. No. It was the first clean answer I had received. Did she ever tell Mom? Not that I heard. Then why is Mom promising Chloe $900,000? He exhaled. Your mother thinks she knows what your grandmother wanted. That isn't the same thing. I didn't say it was. I studied him. At brunch, I had assumed his silence meant he supported Mom. Now I wasn't sure. Did you know Mom told Chloe I'd agreed? His eyebrows rose. Agreed to what? To let Chloe use most of Grandma's money. Dad set the rag down. She told her that? Months ago. His face tightened. But he didn't defend Mom. That bothered me in a different way. Dad, what happened between Mom and Grandma before she died? He looked toward the house again. There was an argument. About Chloe? Sort of. What does that mean? He leaned against the bench. Your mother brought some information over to your grandmother's place, numbers, a brochure, things about the studio. Willow and Finch. He nodded. This was before Grandma died. About 4 months before. I tried to picture it. Mom sitting at Grandma's kitchen table with purchase figures for a business Chloe didn't own yet, discussing money Grandma hadn't given anyone. Why was Mom showing her that? She thought your grandmother would be happy Chloe had a plan. Was she? Dad gave a humorless little smile. No. He said Grandma had looked through the brochure, then asked several questions about what Chloe could afford herself. Mom apparently kept talking about how the family could help with the rest. Then your grandmother asked whether anyone had talked to you, Dad said. Me? Why? I didn't understand that either. What did Mom say? I don't remember the exact words. Trey? Dad rubbed the back of his neck. Something like you wouldn't object, that you'd want Chloe to have the opportunity. My stomach tightened. Was I even part of this conversation? No. Had anyone asked me? He shook his head. There it was again. My agreement existed before anyone bothered to request it. What happened next? Your grandmother got angry. Hot, Chloe. No. His answer came quickly. Chloe wasn't there? Then at Mom? Dad hesitated. At the assumption, I think. That distinction mattered. Grandma hadn't objected to Chloe wanting the studio. She had objected to people planning how it would be funded. Dad started rearranging tools that didn't need rearranging. I could tell he wanted the conversation over. You said there was something else. I didn't say that. Your face did. He almost smiled, then stopped. Afterward, your grandmother called me? Why? She asked me a strange question. I waited. She asked whether your mother ever let you say no. For a second I thought I had misheard him. Say no to what? She didn't specify. What did you tell her? Dad looked embarrassed. I said you were an adult, and nobody needed to let you do anything. That sounded exactly like him, technically reasonable and completely beside the point. What did Grandma say? She said. That wasn't my question. Despite everything, I nearly laughed. That sounded like her too. I left Dad in the garage and sat in my car without starting it. A few memories came back, not dramatic enough to have seemed important at the time. The year Chloe moved apartments on the same weekend, I had planned a short trip. Mom asked me to cancel because Chloe was overwhelmed. I did. When Grandma downsized, I liked an old walnut cabinet, but Mom said it would help Chloe furnish her apartment, so I told Chloe to take it. When my parents had an unexpected home repair, I covered part of it because Chloe was between jobs. Nobody forced me. That was what made the pattern hard to see. They asked, and I said yes, usually before I had time to decide whether I wanted to. The requests always came wrapped in the same explanation: Chloe needed it more, and I would be fine. Maybe Grandma had noticed before I did. More importantly, Dad had given me another piece of the puzzle. Grandma's anger hadn't been aimed at Chloe. She had asked why decisions involving me were being made without me. If I wanted to understand what changed during those final months, I needed someone who had been around Grandma without being part of our family's habits. There was one person who fit. Ruth Delgado had lived next door to Grandma for 18 years. I hadn't spoken to her since the memorial. I sent a short message asking whether I could visit and talk about Grandma's last few months. Her reply came less than a minute later. Of course. I wondered when you'd ask me about that afternoon. I stared at the screen. I hadn't mentioned an argument. I hadn't mentioned Mom, Chloe, Willow and Finch, or the brochures. But Ruth already knew exactly which afternoon I meant. I met Ruth the next afternoon at the small brick house beside Grandma's. She had already put coffee on, and from her kitchen window I could see the maple tree that used to drop leaves across both yards every October. For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things: her knee bothering her, the new family renting across the street, how strange Grandma's house looked with different curtains. Then Ruth set down her mug and said, "You didn't come here for neighborhood news." I told her about the brunch, the $900,000, and Mom telling Chloe I had already agreed. I left out the amount Grandma had actually left me. Ruth listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked toward Grandma's old house. "Your mother brought those business papers over one afternoon," she said. "I was there." That was the first thing I needed to know. "What did you hear?" Ruth hesitated. "I don't want to turn your grandmother's private conversations into gossip." "Neither do I. Just tell me what you actually heard." She nodded. Mom had arrived carrying a glossy Willow and Finch brochure and several printed pages covered in figures. Grandma had been making tea. Ruth was helping her move a heavy planter near the back door and stayed because Grandma asked her to. At first, the conversation was ordinary. Mom talked about how well Chloe was doing at the studio and how the owner might sell. Grandma apparently said she was proud Chloe had finally found work she loved. Then Mom began talking about purchase prices, renovations, and what the family could contribute. "Your grandmother asked how much Chloe had saved," Ruth said. "Your mother said that wasn't really the point because there would be other resources." I knew what those words meant now. Did Grandma mention her estate? Not first. Ruth said Mom did. She talked about how Grandma's money could give Chloe the kind of start she had never had. Grandma listened for a while, then asked one question. "Has Natalie agreed to any of this?" I felt my shoulders tighten. And Mom said. Ruth looked uncomfortable. I can't promise the wording is exact, but the meaning was clear. She said you wouldn't mind. She said you never did. I stared into my coffee. It was such a small sentence, not cruel, not dramatic. It was probably something Mom had said dozens of times without thinking. Natalie won't mind. Natalie can handle it. Natalie will understand. Somehow Grandma had heard something inside those words that I hadn't. What did Grandma do? She got very quiet. Ruth said that surprised her more than if Grandma had yelled. Grandma gathered the papers into a stack, pushed them back across the table, and told Mom not to make plans with things that had not been offered. Mom argued that she was only trying to make sure Chloe had a future. Grandma asked again whether anyone had asked me. Mom apparently said there was no reason to create conflict over something I would happily do anyway. Your grandmother didn't seem angry at Chloe, Ruth said. She was angry that everybody already knew your answer before asking the question. I looked out the window at Grandma's empty porch. Did she say anything after Mom left? Ruth nodded. She asked me, when did being dependable become permission? That sentence landed differently than the birthday card. I remembered Grandma asking me odd questions during her last year. Was I happy? Did my parents ever ask what I wanted before telling me what everyone needed? Once, while we were folding towels in her laundry room, she asked, if I gave you something valuable, would you keep it? I had laughed and told her she should spend her money on herself. At the time, none of those conversations seemed connected. Now they lined up uncomfortably well. I had thought Grandma was worrying because she was getting older. Maybe she had been trying to find out whether I could recognize a pattern she had already seen. The hardest part was realizing Mom had not forced most of my sacrifices. She rarely needed to. When Chloe needed help moving, I changed my plans. When my parents needed money for a repair, I sent it. When Grandma downsized and both Chloe and I liked the same cabinet, I stepped aside. Each choice looked harmless by itself. Put together, they had taught my family something dangerous. If Natalie had more, Natalie would give. I had helped teach them that. Ruth reached across the table and touched the edge of my hand. Your grandmother loved both of you girls. I know. I'm telling you because I don't want you turning this into proof she loved you more. That mattered. I don't think she did. And suddenly the inheritance made more sense. Maybe Grandma hadn't chosen me over Chloe. Maybe she had chosen a boundary nobody else was willing to leave intact. I stood to go, but Ruth stopped me at the door. There's one more thing. She disappeared into a hallway and returned with a cream-colored envelope. My mother's name was written across the front in Grandma's handwriting. Beneath it were 6 words, for Linda. Before you promise anything else. Where did you get that? I asked. Ruth said Grandma had written it after the argument. Mom came back a few days later, saw the envelope on Grandma's table, argued with her again, and left without taking it. Grandma later asked Ruth to keep it safe. Did you read it? Of course not. I turned it over. The flap was still sealed. For one irrational second, I wanted to open it. It might contain the answer to everything. Then I realized how absurd that would be. My entire problem was that other people had decided my consent didn't matter. I wasn't going to solve it by ignoring someone else's boundary. It's addressed to Mom, I said. Then she should have it. On the drive home, I understood that the envelope could wait. Chloe could not. Her meeting with Diane was approaching, and she was still making plans around money Mom had invented access to. I pulled into a parking lot and texted her before I could overthink it. Meet me before you go to the studio tomorrow. I need to tell you something Mom doesn't know. Chloe replied almost immediately. Is this about Grandma's money? I typed yes. Then I added, please don't make any offer until we talk. For the first time since brunch, I wasn't trying to decide how to keep everyone calm. I was deciding what needed to happen next. Grandma's envelope sat unopened on the passenger seat. Whatever was inside might explain Mom. But first I needed to stop my sister from risking her future on a promise that had never belonged to our mother to make. And this time, she agreed. Chloe was already waiting when I reached the coffee shop the next morning. She had chosen a table near the back, and her laptop was open beside a folder with the Willow and Finch logo printed across the front. I could tell she had been working because 3 pages were covered with handwritten numbers. She didn't bother with small talk. What does Mom not know? I sat across from her. I had spent most of the night deciding how much to tell her. If I revealed the 3.8 million immediately, every other question would disappear behind that number. I needed Chloe to understand the problem before she decided the problem was simply that I had inherited more than she had. There isn't a family fund Mom controls, I said. Chloe frowned. What does that mean? It means she cannot promise you Grandma's money. Is the estate still tied up? No? Then where is it? That's not the first question you should be asking. Her expression hardened. Nate, I have a meeting with Diane in 2 hours. I don't have time for riddles. Then tell me exactly what you promised her. Chloe leaned back. I didn't promise her anything crazy. How much? She looked toward the window. I told her I could put down 250,000 pretty quickly. I stared at her. Based on what? Based on Mom telling me the money was available. Did you show Diane proof of funds? No. Did you sign anything? No. Did she change the terms because she thought you had the cash? Chloe's irritation faded. Probably. That was the consequence I had been worried about. She hadn't legally trapped herself yet, but she had negotiated from a financial position that wasn't real. Call her. And say what? That your financing changed and you need to restructure the offer. Chloe shook her head. She'll think I'm unreliable. Maybe. But that's better than letting her think you have 250,000 you don't have. I was supposed to have it. Who told you that? She opened her mouth, then stopped. For the first time, I saw the question land where it belonged, not on Grandma, not on me, on Mom. Chloe closed the laptop. So there really is money. Yes. And Mom doesn't control it. Correct? Do you? I held her gaze. Yes. Her face changed, but she didn't ask how much. Not yet. Did Grandma leave it to you? We'll talk about that. First, fix the thing that can hurt you today. Chloe looked down at her phone. You sound like my manager. Occupational hazard. That got half a smile, which disappeared quickly. Will you stay while I call? Of course. I didn't offer to make the call for her. I didn't offer to cover the deposit. I just sat there. Chloe called Diane and told her she had discovered that part of her expected financing was not actually available to her. She didn't blame Mom or mention an inheritance. Diane was clearly disappointed. I could hear enough from Chloe's side to understand that the original timeline would no longer work. Chloe asked whether they could postpone formal negotiations for a few days while she rebuilt the financing plan. After a long pause, she nodded. Thank you, I understand. When she hung up, she put both hands over her face. She's giving me until Friday. That's something. She also said there are 2 other interested buyers. That's also something. Chloe lowered her hands. You're terrible at comforting people. I'm trying not to lie to you. She looked at me for a moment. Apparently that's a useful change. Neither of us needed to ask who she meant. She took a sip of cold coffee and said, Did Mom know she couldn't promise me that money? That's what I'm trying to find out. You still haven't told me what Grandma left you. Because I don't want the amount to become the only thing we talk about. Zit. Lot. I thought about lying and decided I was done making things easier by making them less true. Yes. Chloe stared at the table. And Mom told me you'd already agreed to give most of whatever it was to me. Yes. But you didn't. No. She nodded slowly. Okay, I had expected anger. Maybe an accusation that I had hidden something from her. Instead, she looked embarrassed. I should have asked you? Yes. She looked up, surprised by the answer. I softened it without taking it back. But Mom also shouldn't have told you I'd agreed when I hadn't. Chloe closed her folder. What are you going to do? I reached into my bag and showed her Grandma's sealed envelope. I explained where Ruth found it and why I hadn't opened it. Chloe read the words on the front. Before you promise anything else, she repeated. That sounds like Grandma. It does. Are you giving it to Mom? Today? Chloe offered to come with me. I told her not yet. She had enough to process, and I wanted to see Mom's reaction before another family argument swallowed the actual question. Dad's truck was in the driveway when I arrived. Mom opened the door and immediately looked at the envelope in my hand. Her face changed before I said anything. Ruth had this, I said. Mom didn't take it. Dad came from the hallway, saw Grandma's handwriting, and stopped. You remember it, I said. Mom finally reached for the envelope. Your grandmother was angry when she wrote this. About what? About everything. That's convenient. Natalie. She placed the envelope on the kitchen counter without opening it. Your grandmother didn't understand what it takes to keep a family together. I looked at Dad. He said nothing. Then open it. Mom's hand moved toward the envelope and stopped. Not with you standing here waiting to judge me. A week earlier, I might have pushed. I might have demanded the letter because I wanted an answer. Instead, I picked up my bag. Fine, it's yours. Mom looked surprised. You're leaving? Yes. After bringing this here, the letter isn't mine to open. I reached the doorway, then turned back. But the promises you made in my name are my business. Mom folded her arms. I was trying to help your sister. Chloe had to call Diane this morning and tell her the financing you promised isn't secure. The color left Mom's face. You told her that. I told her the truth. You don't control Grandma's money. You may have just cost her the studio. No, I stopped her from making an offer based on money she doesn't have. Dad finally spoke. Lender, Natalie has a point. Mom turned on him. No, you have something to say. I watched them and understood that if I stayed, the conversation would become another argument about Chloe, fairness, timing, and whether I had been too harsh. The central issue would disappear again, so I interrupted. Tomorrow evening, all four of us. Mom looked at me. What? You, Dad, Chloe, and me. We're going to sit down and talk about exactly what Grandma said, exactly what you promised, and exactly when you decided I had agreed. I don't need a family tribunal. Neither do I. I need you to stop speaking for me. I left before she could answer. In my car, Chloe had sent one message. Diane agreed to review a smaller structure Friday. Underneath it was another. I'm sorry I never asked you directly. I read that twice before replying. We'll talk tomorrow, for the first time. The next family conversation wasn't happening because Mom had arranged it. Chloe needed something, or Dad wanted everyone to keep the peace. It was happening because I had decided there was a question they were finally going to answer. How many promises had my mother made using a yes I had never given? Chloe showed up at my apartment 40 minutes before the family meeting. She was still wearing her Willow and Finch badge, and the first thing she said when I opened the door was, Dad finally told me something. I let her in. About Grandma. About Mom. About how long she'd been planning this. Chloe sat at my kitchen table but didn't take off her coat. She said she had called Dad after work because she wanted to know whether he had believed the same story she had. That Grandma intended her money to fund the studio, and that I had already agreed. Dad admitted Mom had been talking about Grandma helping Chloe long before the argument Ruth witnessed. Not just months. Years. Whenever Chloe struggled with school work, rent, or another uncertain plan, Mom apparently reassured Dad that Grandma would eventually leave enough money to give Chloe stability. I thought she was just encouraging me, Chloe said. I didn't realize she was building my future around it. Then she remembered something she had dismissed at the time. a few months before Grandma died. Chloe had stopped by Grandma's house after work. She was excited because Mom had shown her rough numbers for buying Willow and Finch. Chloe mentioned possible renovations and told Grandma she might finally own the place someday. Grandma listened, then asked, "What are you buying with money nobody gave you?" Chloe had gone home angry. I thought she was saying I wasn't capable of owning a business. Did she mention me? No. That's why I never connected it. Chloe looked down. I never asked her whether she'd actually offered the money either. That was the first time took responsibility without turning herself into the villain. Mom had missiled her, but Chloe had accepted a convenient story because it benefited her. Dad told me something else, she said. Grandma told them to stop. Stop what? Making plans with her estate. That changed what tonight's conversation needed to establish. Mom could still argue about Grandma's intentions, but if Grandma had explicitly told our parents to stop allocating her money, then this was no longer just a misunderstanding. At 6, Chloe and I arrived together. Mom noticed. Dad did too. Grandma's envelope was no longer on the kitchen counter. Nobody mentioned whether Mom had opened it. We sat in the living room, and Mom started first. Before this becomes another accusation, I want everyone to remember that I was trying to help Chloe. I know, I said. That's not the question. Then what is? Did Grandma ever promise you $900,000 for Chloe? Mom frowned. We've already discussed this. No. You've told me what you think she wanted. I'm asking whether she ever promised you that money. Mom looked at Dad, then Chloe. Why does everything suddenly need to be reduced to exact wording? Because Chloe nearly negotiated a business purchase based on your exact number. Chloe spoke quietly. Mom, just answer her. Mom's expression changed. She had expected Chloe to be beside her. Your grandmother never sat me down and said, "Linda, I promised Chloe $900,000, if that's what you mean." So no, I said. No, not in those words. In any words? She exhaled. No. The room went still. It was a simple answer, but it removed the foundation beneath everything that had happened since brunch. Then Dad said, "She actually told us to stop making plans with the estate." Mom turned toward him. Mark. She did. You know what she was like when she got angry. That doesn't mean she didn't say it. I asked Dad when. He confirmed it happened after the afternoon with the Willow and Finch brochures. Grandma told both of them that nobody was to assign her money, promise it, or build plans around it while she was alive. Then why did you keep telling Chloe it would be available? I asked Mom. She pressed her lips together. Because your grandmother was reacting emotionally. I was looking at reality. What reality? That Chloe needed help. There was no cruelty in her voice. That almost made it harder. She genuinely believed what came next. Natalie, you have a career, you have savings. You've been responsible since you were 20. Chloe has taken longer to find her footing. If one child already has a solid foundation and the other doesn't, helping the second child isn't favoritism, it's common sense. With someone else's money? With family resources. Grandma's money wasn't a family resource just because you decided it was. Mom shook her head. This is exactly what I mean. Everything is ownership and permission now. Families help each other. Chloe leaned forward. Did Natalie ever say yes? Mom looked at her. What? You told me Natalie agreed I could use most of Grandma's money. Did she ever actually say yes? I knew how she felt. That's not what I asked. Hearing Grandma's phrasing come through Chloe was almost strange. Mom looked at me. You have always helped your sister. That still isn't yes. You never objected before. And there it was. Not a confession, not a scheme, a belief. Because I had given before. Mom believed she could promise that I would give again. Chloe's face tightened. You told me she'd already agreed. Because I knew she would understand. You didn't know, Chloe said. You assumed. Mom stood. I'm not going to sit here while everyone acts like I stole something. I was trying to make sure you had a future. By promising me something that wasn't yours? Chloe asked. Mom walked toward the kitchen without answering. I expected Dad to follow her. He didn't. Instead, he stayed in his chair, staring at his hands. Dad, I said, when Grandma told you to stop, why didn't you stop Mom? He took a long time to answer. I told her we should wait until the estate was settled. She said waiting wouldn't change anything. Why not? He looked toward the kitchen, then back at me. Because she thought whatever happened, you would make it work. I felt something settle into place. So she thought she'd control the estate? No. Dad shook his head. That's the part you're missing. Chloe and I both waited. Your mother wasn't counting on controlling Grandma's estate. Then what was she counting on? Dad looked directly at me. You? Suddenly the $900,000 made terrible sense. Mom had never needed to know who inherited Grandma's money. She had never needed authority over an account. She only needed to believe one thing she had believed about me for years. When the family needed something, Natalie would eventually say yes. Dad's answer should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired. You, he had said, as if that explained how Mom could promise $900,000 she didn't control. The worst part was that it did. Mom hadn't needed access to Grandma's accounts. She hadn't needed to know the will, the balance, or even who inherited what. She had counted on a habit. For years. When someone in the family needed something, and I could provide it, I usually did. Dad had watched it often enough to believe I would make the problem disappear. Mom came back from the kitchen and saw us still sitting there. What? She asked. Dad looked at her. I told them. Told us what? Chloe said. That you thought Natalie would make it work no matter what Grandma did. Mom's shoulders dropped slightly. That's not some sinister plan. I know my daughter. Do you? I asked. She looked at me. You've always cared about this family. That isn't the same as agreeing to every request before I hear it. Nobody said it was. You told Chloe I had already agreed. Mom rubbed her forehead. Because I knew you wouldn't let your sister lose an opportunity like this over money you don't need. There it was again, almost casual. Money I didn't need. Not money she owned. Not money Grandma had assigned to Chloe. Money she assumed I could surrender because I was doing well. I asked Dad what happened after Grandma died. He said he told Mom they should wait until they knew what the estate actually looked like. Mom had told him the details wouldn't matter because I would share whatever came to me. And you accepted that? I asked. Dad didn't defend himself. Yes. Did either of you call me? No. Ask what Grandma told me. No. Ask whether I wanted to give Chloe hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dad shook his head. Mom interrupted. Because until this week, there was no reason to believe you would suddenly treat your sister like a stranger. Chloe stood up. Stop doing that. Mom blinked. Doing what? Making Natalie's answer a test of whether she loves me. The room went quiet. Chloe continued. If she gives me the money, she cares about family. If she doesn't, she's selfish. That means she never really gets to choose. Mom stared at her. I hadn't expected Chloe to say it before I could. I was trying to help you, Mom said. I know, Chloe replied, but you made me think my sister had offered me something she never offered. Mom sat down again. So what is this really about, Natalie? You obviously know something about the estate. I had planned to wait until I understood everything. Now I did. There was no hidden mechanism left to uncover. The mechanism was me. I reached into my bag and took out the estate summary I had brought. I didn't hand it to anyone. Grandma's estate was settled 3 weeks ago. Mom's eyes narrowed. Chloe stayed still. She left me $3.8 million. Nobody spoke. Mom's expression changed first. 3.8. Yes. And Chloe. Grandma didn't leave Chloe a share of that money. Mom looked at Dad, then back at me. She left all of it to you? Yes. Dad leaned back slowly. Chloe looked down at her hands. Mom asked the question Chloe didn't. Why would she do that? I think you already know part of the answer. Mom's face hardened. Don't make this about that argument. It wasn't one argument. Grandma told you to stop making plans with her money, and you kept making them. She asked whether anyone had asked me what I wanted. You decided that wasn't necessary, so she punished Chloe? Chloe looked up immediately. Mum? Don't. What else would you call it? I wouldn't call it anything until we stopped pretending Grandma owed me a business. The balance in the room changed. Mom had spent years protecting and arranging things for Chloe. Now Chloe was refusing the version of protection that required me to lose a choice. Mom turned back to me. And you're really going to keep all of it? I knew that question was coming. A week earlier, I might have explained myself. I might have listed retirement plans, taxes, investments, or ways I could still help later. Instead I said, I'm not giving Chloe $900,000 because you promised it. That's not what I asked. It's the answer that matters. I told her I wasn't saying I would never help Chloe or anyone else. I was saying nobody would announce my help before asking me again. There would be no retroactive consent, no family calculation based on who supposedly needed my money more, and no promise made in my name. Mom shook her head. Grandma's money is going to divide this family. The money didn't do that, I said. The problem started when you spent my yes before I gave it. Mom stood abruptly and picked up her purse. She looked at Chloe. Come on. We're leaving. Chloe stayed seated. No. Mom stopped. What? I'm staying? Chloe, this has been enough for one night. I know. That's why I need to figure out what I want without you telling me first. Mom looked genuinely hurt. I almost stepped in to soften it. Then I remembered Grandma's card and stayed quiet. Dad didn't move either. Mom left alone, and nobody rushed after her this time. Not even Dad. After the door closed, Chloe let out a breath and stared at the floor. I may have just lost Willow and Finch. Maybe, I said. Diane mentioned a smaller structure, she said. A minority stake first. Seller financing. An option to buy more later. Can you afford that? Maybe. Without Grandma's money. I nodded. I wanted to offer help. The impulse came so quickly it almost made me laugh. Instead I asked, do you want the whole company, or did everyone just decide that was the only version worth having? Chloe thought about it. I don't know yet. Then figure that out first. She looked at me. You're not going to offer to fix this, are you? No. To my surprise, she smiled. Good. For the first time, neither of us was playing the role Mom had assigned us. Chloe wasn't the daughter who had to be rescued, and I wasn't the daughter expected to rescue her. The $3.8 million was finally out in the open, but the most important thing revealed that night wasn't the amount. It was why my parents had been so confident they could promise it. They had never needed control of Grandma's money. They believed they had control of my answer. And for the first time, they were wrong. Several weeks later, Chloe called me from Willow and Finch and said, I signed something today? For half a second, my stomach tightened. Then she laughed. Not the thing Mom wanted me to sign. Diane had agreed to sell Chloe a minority stake in the studio, with an option to increase her ownership over the next few years. The deal was smaller than the one Chloe had imagined at brunch. There was no giant renovation budget, no immediate takeover, and no $250,000 deposit. Chloe was using her savings, a manageable seller, financing arrangement, and income from the business itself. Can you actually afford it? I asked. Yes, she said. That's the weird part. I can look at every payment and know where it comes from. I visited the studio that evening. Chloe was standing behind a work table covered with fabric samples and seating charts. But this time she looked happy. She showed me the small office that was officially part hers now. I thought I'd feel embarrassed, she admitted. About not buying the whole company. About everyone knowing I couldn't. You couldn't buy the whole company with money that wasn't yours. Exactly. She leaned against the desk. I'm starting to understand the difference. We stayed after the staff left and finally had the conversation we should have had years earlier. Chloe told me Mom had always described me as the one who didn't care about getting things. I didn't need attention. I didn't mind changing plans. I didn't get attached to money or furniture or holidays. I believed her, Chloe said, because it was convenient. Partly. I appreciated that she didn't pretend otherwise, but also because you never corrected it. That was true too. I told her how often I had said, "It's fine," because explaining why something bothered me felt harder than absorbing it. Chloe admitted she had benefited from that. She also told me she couldn't spend the rest of her life apologizing for being the daughter Mom worried about more. I don't want you to, I said. I just want you to ask me instead of asking Mom what I think. Deal. A week later, Dad asked me to meet him for coffee. He didn't arrive with a speech about family or tell me I should forgive Mom. He said, I kept calling it keeping the peace, when what I really meant was letting you take the cost. I told him I appreciated it. I also told him things weren't going back to normal immediately. I know, he said. Maybe normal was part of the problem. We started talking again after that, carefully. Mom was harder. For almost a month, our communication consisted mostly of short messages. She still believed families should help one another. I agreed. The difference was simple help had to be asked for, offered, and chosen. Eventually she asked to meet. She brought Grandma's envelope. It had been opened. She placed it between us, but didn't slide it toward me. I'm not going to ask to read it, I said. I know. Mom looked down at Grandma's handwriting. She said if I kept deciding which daughter deserved what, I'd eventually lose the trust of both of you. I waited. Was she right? Mom asked. About that? Yes, Mom's eyes filled, but she didn't apologize for everything or suddenly agree with me about the inheritance. She said she still thought I had more than I needed. I told her maybe I did. But having more doesn't give someone else permission to promise it. She nodded once. It wasn't reconciliation. It was the first conversation we'd had where she didn't try to supply my answer for me. Before we left, she asked what I planned to do with the 3.8 million. I'm still deciding, I said, and I meant it. I invested most of it conservatively. I set aside money for my own future and planned a modest contribution to a local program Grandma had supported for years. I didn't create a family fund. I didn't announce how much anyone might receive someday. Most importantly, I stopped feeling like I needed a morally impressive plan just to justify keeping control of what Grandma had left me. A few months later, I stopped by Willow Finch near closing time. Chloe was alone, rearranging samples for a wedding presentation. Still glad you did the smaller deal? I asked. She looked around the studio. I thought getting everything at once would make me feel secure. Does this? She smiled. More. For once, smaller did not feel like failure. It felt like something neither of us had ever borrowed. Driving home, I understood why. Grandma hadn't left me 3.8 million because Chloe was worthless, or because I was the better granddaughter, or because she wanted to watch our family fight over money. She had seen something the rest of us had normalized. One daughter was always being rescued, while the other was always expected to cope. Mom's biggest mistake was assuming that because I usually could cope, she no longer needed my permission. Dad's was believing silence made him neutral. Chloe's was accepting a version of my consent because it benefited her. Mine was saying, it's fine. So often that eventually everyone believed it. The inheritance didn't magically repair any of that. It simply created one decision large enough that I could no longer pretend the pattern didn't matter. For years, being fine meant taking whatever was left after everyone else's needs had been considered. Now it meant something different. I could help someone and still have boundaries. I could love Chloe without financing the future Mom designed for her. I could forgive Dad without pretending his silence hadn't mattered. And I could leave things unresolved with Mom without rushing to fix her discomfort. Grandma had left me money, but what she really protected was something my family had been spending for years without noticing my right to choose. The first time I finally said no, nothing collapsed. Chloe found another path. Dad faced what he had avoided. Mom had to hear answers she hadn't written herself. And I learned that no was not the opposite of loving my family. Sometimes it was the only way to make sure the yes, when I gave it, actually belonged to me.